Hello, and welcome to the final webinar in the 2022-2023 Radiation Safety and Wellness Webinar Series, Canadian Standards Board 192.3, Transportation of Dangerous Goods Training, Assessment, and Competency. The Radiation Safety Institute of Canada is committed to being an independent source of knowledge about radiation safety in the workplace, the community, and the environment. We are presenting this topic today because feedback from stakeholders indicated that many responsible for the worker training were not aware of this new standard. While our expertise is in the transportation of dangerous goods class 7 radioactive materials, this training standard applies to all dangerous goods materials. Welcome to everyone, whether you work with nuclear materials or not, and thank you for joining us today. As manager of training, I will give a presentation on the standard for approximately a half hour. This will be followed by a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session with myself and Laura Boksman, health physicist, radiation protection consultant, and former chief scientist with the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. Please note that this is an information session only and does not constitute legal advice. Unless otherwise stated, information presented is based on materials available online from the Government of Canada, Transport Canada, the Canadian Standards Board, and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Laura and I will answer questions based on our examination of the documents, as well as our individual educational backgrounds and experience, but we cannot and do not speak on behalf of any regulator. The final 20 minutes of today's webinar will be a movement break led by Charlmane Wong of Gong, Tai-Chi, and Gong in Richmond Hill, Ontario. This school is part of the Gong Tai-Chi College, which was founded in 1988 and is a large organization with campuses located primarily in Canada, China, and a few other locations. The schools are all dedicated to teaching the art of Tai Chi with decades worth of accumulated experience and research to define and design a modern advanced set of teaching methods. Let's take a moment to go over the functionality of the Zoom meeting. We ask that during the presentation portion that the audio and video be from the presenters only. We have found that although you can access the audio through the computer or telephone, the quality of sound tends to be better when listening from a computer. Please use the chat feature for any discussions and post questions arriving from the content in the Q&A. This will help us to find your questions for the allotted Q&A portion while allowing people to have a conversation in the chat. As the webinar is only 40 minutes in length and is immediately followed by our wellness session, time may not permit for us to answer all of the questions during the webinar. The answers will be posted on our website along with a link to the video recording and a copy of the slides. This can be found under Education Webinars. I will be sending a confirmation of attendance email after the webinar and will include a link to the page with that communication. I will also include the topics covered and the length of time spent in the webinar, as some people have requested this to send to the professional association. Lastly, I have automatic closed captioning enabled in the slide presentation. If they are being blocked by your Zoom controls, you should be able to select a different way to view the webinar in Zoom, which makes them easier to see. Today, we will be discussing the new Canadian Standards Board Standard 192.3, Transportation of Dangerous Goods Training, Assessment, and Competency. The webinar will begin with a quick overview of the regulation of transportation of nuclear material in Canada, and then move on to information about the new training standard, beginning with its history and the proposed amendments to the TDG regulations to bring it into place, an overview of the contents of the standard, and how it is different than current practice. We will conclude with a reminder about additional training requirements over and above the standard. After the presentation, I will be joined by Laura Boksman to answer questions regarding the standard and the transportation of nuclear materials as time permits. Transport Canada is the regulator for all 9 classes of dangerous goods in Canada through the Transportation of Dangerous Goods, or TDG, Act and regulation. The class for radioactive materials is class 7. For substances and devices regulated by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or CNSC, the packaging and transport of nuclear substance regulations under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act must be followed, along with all other CNSC regulations applicable to the substance or device. Both Transport Canada and the CNSC refer to the other regulators' regulations within their own, as well as to the regulations for the safe transport of nuclear materials published by the International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA. In the case of naturally occurring radioactive materials, or NORM, not involved in the nuclear fuel cycle, the packaging and transport of nuclear substance regulations give levels at which regulation goes to the provincial or territorial jurisdiction and unconditional release limits. To help determine the applicable regulations for NORM by radionuclide, please see Volume 3, Transportation, Canadian Guidelines for the Management of Naturally Occurring Radioactive Materials, NORM, created by the Federal, Provincial, Territorial Radiation Protection Committee. This will help you to know if the TDG regulations apply to your NORM radionuclide. If in doubt, well before starting the transport processes, contact Transport Canada or the CNSC through non-emergency channels. Part 6 of the current TDG regulations gives the training requirements for anyone who handles, offers for transport, or transport dangerous goods. In section 6.1(1)(a), it tells that a person must be adequately trained and hold an according training certificate. Section 6.1(1)(b) tells that those who do not meet the requirements of subsection A must be in the presence and under direct supervision of someone who is. On December 11th, 2021, the Canada Gazette, Part 1, Volume 155, Number 50, Regulations Amending the Transportation of Dangerous Goods Regulations, Part 6, Training, was published. This document explains the reasoning for and the process of amending the TDG regulations to remove the term adequately trained and instead incorporate a training standard based on competencies developed by the Canadian General Standards Board, along with other related changes. Consultations on the need for change began in 2016, including targeted and online consultation with industry, governmental, training school, and public stakeholders. Input was requested at a variety of stages and are detailed in the Gazette publication. This need was based on several issues outlined in the issues section. The Gazette publication notes that from 2014 to 2019, of the 409 dangerous goods incidents resulting in injury or death reported, approximately 55 were due to improper or insufficient training. These incidents resulted in 174 injuries and 3 fatalities. During the same time period, a review of 300 training violations, 69 violations were attributed to people performing tasks for which they had not been adequately trained. Inspectors have found that those in possession of a valid training certificate may not have the knowledge and skills required to perform job tasks related to their duties related to TDG, so are therefore not adequately trained. The CGSB standard was published in November 2020, and the proposed amended regulations were published for comment in December 2021, comment period now closed. In a communication with Transport Canada, it was stated that the amended regulations are expected to be published in the Gazette Part 2 this fall, once documents to support their implementation are prepared to be available to the Canadian public. They also noted that while the new regulations will come into force on the day they are published, there will be a 12-month grace period for people to comply, making the expected date for the full implementation the fall of 2024. Before going into the changes expected to be brought in, let's take a quick run through of the content of the current sections on training. As previously stated, Part 6 of the TDG regulations is where you find the current training requirements. The main points of 6.1(1) are that anyone who handles, offers for transport, or transports dangerous goods must be adequately trained, hold an according training certificate, or be in the presence or under the direct supervision of someone who meets those requirements. There are also requirements of the employer to make sure this is the case, given in 6.1(2). 6.2 gives topics for which people are required to be trained must have sound knowledge. if the topics directly relate to the person's duties and to the dangerous goods expected to be involved. 6.3 gives the requirements for the training certificate. 6.4 gives the requirements for foreign carriers. 6.5 gives the expiry for training certificates, while sections 6.6 through 6.8 give requirements for keeping and showing proof of training. With respect to the new training standard, you find the proposed regulatory text, which refers to it, at the bottom of the Gazette Part 1 publication. Please remember to check the Gazette Part 2 publication to see the actual wording of the amended regulations, expected to be published in the fall of 2023. After they are published, persons have 12 months to be in compliance. Two major changes proposed are to require people be competent in accordance with the CGSB 192.3 standard instead of being adequately trained, and for them to hold a certificate of competency instead of holding a training certificate. The other sections of the proposed amendments to the regulations are mainly changing the subsections on the previous slides to implement the new standard and the concept of a certificate of competency rather than training certificate into all the sections of Part 6. There's not time to go through all the details or the details of the certificate of competency, so it is recommended that those for whom this has impact read the full Gazette Part 1 publication. I will include it as a link in the materials provided after the slideshow is put on our website. So what is this standard? It was created by the Canadian General Standards Board Committee with members from industry, training, organizations, and government. The introduction to the standard notes, where there are differences between the requirements of the TDG regulations and this standard, the TDG regulations prevail unless specified otherwise to the extent of the difference. Continuing the quote, this standard requires that all persons who handle, offer for transport, or transport dangerous goods be provided with general awareness training and be assessed. The purpose of general awareness training is to ensure that there is a baseline level of knowledge amongst persons who handle, offer for transport, or transport dangerous goods. In addition, all persons who handle, offer for transport, or transport dangerous goods must receive function-specific training based on the person's tasks and be assessed. The previous quote from the standard encompasses one of the largest shifts in training requirements in adopting the new standard, the requirement for competency-based training. From the Gazette Part 1, competency-based training is a performance-based approach that focuses on the outcome or competency rather than prescriptive methods, for example, prescribing the number of hours of training required. The main components of a competency-based training and assessment, CBTA, approach in the handling and transport of dangerous goods is to ensure that employees receive both general and function-specific training for their tasks, that there are set performance criteria in place to evaluate competence, that records of training and assessment are maintained, and that there is reoccurring training and assessment as needed to maintain skills. Details on what this is expected to look like is given in the body of the standard. I will now go through several sections of the competency where major changes have been made. There is more information, including additional sections in the competency document, so those involved should download a copy and read through it. Another reason to do so is the standard itself is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without permission, but it has a lot of information available as tables in its annexes. I will also provide a link to this in the reference material sent out. Section 2 of the standard states that the standards reference the following documents: the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, Technical Instructions for Safe Transport of Dangerous Goods by Air, document 9284, Transport Canada, Transportation of Dangerous Good Act 1992, including amendments, Transportation of Goods Regulations, including amendments, and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, Packaging and Transport of Nuclear Substances Regulations 2015. Note that these documents in turn may reference other acts, regulations, or documents. To repeat an example, both the Transport Canada and CNSC regulations refer to each other's applicable regulations and the IAEA regulations for the safe transport of radioactive materials. Section 5 gives the general requirements for employers, including the development and maintenance of task descriptions and performance criteria for the assessment of competencies, ensuring compliance with the requirements around training with respect to the standard and in turn the proposed amended regulations, making sure everyone performs their tasks according to their assigned task descriptions, performance criteria, and the training provided to them, and when subcontracting dangerous goods tasks, having procedures or agreements in place to ensure that the contractor has provided training and assessment to their employee or employees in accordance with the standard, and that these procedures or agreements are communicated to the subcontractor. Continuing with Section 5, there are 3 types of trainings which employers must ensure that persons who handle, offer for transport, or transport dangerous goods receive. Those are general awareness, function-specific based on their assigned tasks, and supplementary training. Supplementary training is required when there are regulatory changes or changes in worker tasks. General and function-specific training must be reassessed, and if necessary, retraining and assessment must be given to make sure the person meets the training standard at a frequency of every 24 months if shipments are by air, and 36 months otherwise. Subsection 6.1 gives detail regarding general awareness training and assessment, namely that employers must ensure that workers get general awareness training that covers an overview of the TDG Act and regulations, including roles and responsibilities, the classification and identification of dangerous goods, means of containment or MOC and certification safety marks, dangerous goods safety marks, documentation, emergency response and reporting, special cases, special provisions, and equivalency certificates. Annex B has several learning outcomes to be attained listed for each learning topic. Employers must also ensure trainers or organizations providing the training and assessment have the knowledge, skills, and abilities in the topics they deliver, and the person's identity has been confirmed prior to or at the time of the training. The general awareness assessment must include no less than 25 questions that demonstrate understanding of the learning topics, with no less than 1 question for each of the topics listed, and have a pass rate of 80%. Again, identity must be confirmed for the assessment. Up to 3 attempts are allowed for the general knowledge assessment. If unsuccessful, the person shall be provided further general awareness training and reassessment. There is a provision for alternative assessment methods if circumstances make this necessary. Those involved in training previously will recognize changes to the general awareness, including needing to cover all classes and topics, the identity requirements, the number and scope of questions, and pass mark. But probably the biggest change brought in by the standard for most employers is the need to assess clearly defined function-specific competencies. There is currently the requirement for employers to give task-specific training to ensure people are competent before signing a TDG certificate. Section 6.2 of the standard requires that the employer give employee current and relevant training based on their tasks as listed in sections 6.2.1.1 for road, rail, and marine, and 6.2.1.2 for air. Once you determine the tasks involved, you go to the appropriate annex for detail about the subtasks, points to assess performance, and associated knowledge required to be assessed in order to state that an employee is competent at the tasks. Annex C is for road, rail, and marine, and Annex D is for air. The standard lists and gives details about possible assessment methods in Annex A. It states employers may select one or more of the following assessment methods when assessing the competence of persons. This list is not exhaustive. Written examination, structured interview, demonstration, simulation, collection of evidence. In the regulation amendments listed in the Gazette Part 1 publication, employers must attest that general awareness training and assessment, as well as function-specific training and assessment, tested in accordance with CGSB 192.3 has been completed. Going back to Section 5, it also states that employers shall maintain records. These records shall include the person's name, the task descriptions and performance criteria for the person, a description, copy, or the location of the training material used for training, the dates of the assessment and training, a description of, copy, or reference to the assessment, the name of the person or persons or organization providing the training and assessment, and the outcome of the assessment. So when developing and giving the assessments previously mentioned, not only does the employer need to attest to the fact that the employee is trained according to the standard, they must have detailed records to back that up. As we conclude our overview of the new training standard, do not forget that there are other regulatory requirements for training over and above those covered here. Those include training and radiation protection and applicable regulations for the CNSC, for Class 7 TDG, things like WMIS and IATA for air transport. This presentation only covered the new training standard and related portions of the amendments to the TDG regulations, which are supposed to be coming into force this fall, with their final form yet to be published. Just before we open the floor to questions and the conversation about the new document, one question that came in during the registration was if there were any other changes to TDG regulations coming in. Governments constantly work to update regulations, so both Transport Canada and the CNSC have changes in the works. Transport Canada has quite a number, and the CNSC has updates to the Nuclear Substance and Radiation Devices regulations, which give exemption quantities for licensing, and the certification of packages being considered. I will send links to find this information in the reference material. For the other questions that came in during the registration process, I will cover those just as we open the Q&A section. I now will introduce Laura Boksman, health physicist consultant, to ask her to join me as she has real-world experience with the transportation of nuclear materials, whereas my background is mostly in training and consulting work. So Laura has years of experience, which includes working with the transport of nuclear materials and working as a radiation safety officer. Laura and I will now take questions from participants from the Zoom Q&A. Well, first I'll go through the ones that came in from registration. We'll talk about those, and then we'll move to the Zoom Q&A. If you do not see the Q&A option, then we'll go through those ones, and then I'll ask for further questions in the chat, because in case the question got buried. I see there's just 5 things in the chat right now, so they may not be completely buried. So then, as time permits, we'll open the floor if anybody wants to ask a question directly, or if you're somebody who works in the industry and wishes to comment or add your experience, please do so by raising your hand in the Zoom meeting when we open the floor. At that point, if you prefer to type, if you raise your hand, I can look in the chat and read out, just say, I prefer not to speak, because I know not everybody enjoys being recorded. So I will just read out your comment as well, or your question. If there are questions which we do not get to, we will post the answer on the webinar page of our website and send a link to that page along with other resources to everyone once the video is processed. Will likely be before the end of the week. So now, Laura, you're here somewhere. I am going to stop the share of my slideshow at this point. So we show up and my controls are not hidden, as you're familiar with. So, Laura, just let me see if I can exit full screen and get back to those questions that we had from the registration that we didn't answer in the slide presentation itself. So the first one that came in, it's more of a topic, not about the training standard, but interested in the TDG requirements for nurses when transporting used needles.
Right. So when transporting needles, I'm assuming that these are needles that have been used to administer nuclear medicine cocktails that have radioactive material in them. There would theoretically be a small amount of residue left in the needle. And so the same process has to apply whether you're transporting a full vial or whether you're transporting residue. If, for example, you're in a hospital and then you're an access controlled licensed property, then the TDG requirements don't apply, right? So if you're going from one laboratory to another within the hospital, you don't have to package and transport according to the transportation of dangerous goods regulations. If you are transporting otherwise off-site property, then the same requirements apply, which basically means that you have to do an assessment of how much radioactive material remains in that used needle. And then you would compare that to the requirements to determine whether it's exempt from the requirements or whether it has to be processed as for example, an accepted package or a type A package. Most likely the amount of radioactive material that's left in the needle would be fairly small and would probably be exempt, but you should do the assessment because it is going to be based on the concentration.
All right, thanks, Laura. Another question that came that's not really related to the TDG, but well, since we're here, we might as well answer the maximum radiation exposure a human can stand. So we do have other webinars, and there'll be a link to our webinar page and the materials sent out. And typically when we talk about, rather than exposure, we would talk about the health effects of radiation in terms of different types of dose. And for dose, like for these type of acute effects that, first I have to go back to a biology concept. In biology, that there's a concept not just for radiation, but for all different types of materials of lethal dose 50, which would be the amount of a substance or radiation or other agent that would kill 50% of a population. And for ionizing radiation, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about these nuclear materials, the lethal dose 50 would be around 3.5 joules of energy per kilogram of matter. And a joule per kilogram in SI units is called the gray. So it'd be around 3.5 gray. So if you want more information on topics like this, I'd recommend that you check out some of the other webinars we have, giving a background on radiation and health effects, because the focus of, that's about all I'm going to say on that in terms, because the focus here is the TDG and the training standards. And then one of the last question that came in, the most common mistakes when transporting dangerous goods, that the Transport Canada does track incidents and concerns with the transportation of dangerous goods using their own internal systems. And they occasionally put out reports every few years that summarize that. But the most recent report that I was able to find, and I think Laura would agree, was from 2018. So things may have changed since then. But one of the number one things in one of their communications put out was non-compliances around records, that people are not always maintaining their records appropriately. So, and then this whole change to the standard was due to training, right? So if you go through the regulations, yes, they're very, very detailed, but in broad categories, it seems that from the documents, records is an issue, and this whole change is because training is an issue. So I hope that is a sufficient answer. I'm just going to check. I think Eve's had her hand. I know I said to do the Q&A typed out first, but I think Eve had her hand up before anybody even typed in the Q&A. So Eve, do you want to join us and ask a question or type it out?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm Ev, and I work at the University of British Columbia. First, thank you so much, Lynn, for this presentation and very relevant information for us. I'm a radiation safety associate, so this is directly relevant to what I do on a daily basis.
Just out of curiosity, Eve, sorry to interrupt. Were you aware of these changes coming in?
I was not at all.
Okay. Thank you then.
And actually, my RSO and I were debating whether, I should attend this webinar this morning because we were not aware if, whether this was even relevant, but I'm glad I did. So the new standard, the CGSB 192.3 is this.
Yes.
Sorry, I called it a new standard. Is it a new standard or?
Yes, it was put out in 2020. So, but with the intention that the regulations would then adopt the standard. So it's been out there. And then they, like the whole way the government works in Canada, you may be familiar, but in case others aren't, is that first intentions to change things are published in the Gazette Part 1. And then it's open for a period of time for comment. There's usually discussion with stakeholders, just like there was in this case, well before to go into proposed regulations. And then the Gazette Part 1 leaves opportunity for those that didn't take part in that to make comment. Some of the comments are very interesting. They're good reading as well, but I can't speak to those, but they're worth reading. And then when that period of time closes, then the regulator kind of goes back and does the work, makes any changes to those regulations based on the comments, prepares supplementary materials to help support the implementation. And then when it is actually comes into force, or when they're actually published, is kind of like when the clock starts. And I can see in the past from the transport regulations, the last time they were changed, that the way it was worded is that this is the day that they're published and they come into force 12 months after that date. But this time, I don't know why the difference, but maybe to help people like pick little pieces at a time. They come into force on the date that they're published, but for 12 months, people are permitted to follow the previous regulations. So it's an interesting nuance in how they're bringing it in, but I expect it so that, maybe people change the training courses piece and then get the competency certificate ready afterwards, or the other way around, right? So
I think it's also that way because if somebody is coming new into this, once those new regulations are in force, they can just go straight to the new regulations, as opposed to, well, I've got to do this for 6 months because the old ones are still in force, but then I got to switch in 6 months. So by doing it that way, they're allowed to immediately start following those rules. They don't have to do the old ones and then the new ones.
Okay, thanks, Laura.
That makes sense. Yeah. So my understanding, okay, so the standard was published in 2020 and the new requirements are aligned with this standard.
Yeah,
correct?
So in 2021, they put out the amended regulations based on they probably got feedback on the standard itself. Then in December 2021, they put it online. The very bottom of the document is where the wording of the regulation changes are. That window to comment on it are closed. And now they're working. It was supposed to be out this spring. The CRPA put out a webinar for its members and others in January. And what was stated there was that it was expected April, May. I've been checking the Gazette regularly to see when. So I wrote Transport Canada and they said they're working on a lot of supporting materials because it is a major change. And
Right.
for that reason, they expect that it'll be the fall.
Okay. Thank you for that. I don't want to monopolize the
All right. Yeah.
I do have another question. I don't know if you or Laura would be able to answer. I'm just thinking about the way that we train people at UBC. Obviously, we're a big institution, and we have kind of a generic online TDG training, which obviously does not include class 7 and class 6.2. We have separate training for that. But it's very generic for anyone who might, receive any of those dangerous goods or ship them. And with the function-based or task-based competency, I'm wondering how we're going to implement that, because it's impossible for us to know what everyone does specifically in their own area. So I'm just, maybe this is too broad, but I'm just thinking about how are we going to go about that, verifying people's competency.
I make one recommendation is that you go through the document and read. One thing is that I do notice a difference if it comes in the way it is that it doesn't say you have to redo the full training every two, like now you have to redo the training and the assessment. From what I've read, if I understand it correctly, is that you have to redo the assessment every 2 to 3 years, and so then redo the training. And old training certificates, I think, if I understand correctly, will remain in place. So it's not like you have to redo the whole staff right now. So there's some time to think about it, but it'll be very different. Like when we teach our radiation courses, we have people from all different backgrounds, right? But especially for people in nuclear medicine, people with portable gauges, people industrial radiography, people moving sources around. This is something you really have to wrap your head around, and that's why I want to bring it. We can't go into it. I think we could talk for the next 2 hours about it, but we have to cut it short and get to the other questions. But yeah, and just know that we're here for small questions. If you're developing, just flip some questions over to us. And we do consulting and stuff, but that wasn't the purpose of the webinar. The purpose is just to bring awareness. We're not trying to do self-promotion necessarily, but just know that we're here. So I'm just going to flip through the questions in the Q&A, and then we'll get to Connie and to here. Cheryl had to step out. One is, when do we officially have to have this in place? It will be 12 months after it is published in the Gazette Part 2. And
which is expected to be this fall. And I'm responsible to ensure that the courier has this education, or is the employer of the courier responsible. That would be, because this is TDG, I expect that would be the employer of the courier. But under the CNSC's regulations, it is also the consignee's responsibility to make sure that whoever they have transporting the material meets all the needs. So you have to double check, but it's not your responsibility necessarily to train them. Would you assume that, Laura, as well?
I would agree with that, but don't forget they also have to train their own staff who are providing the material for transport.
Yes, yeah. So you'd still want on your form a checkbox somewhere that you check to make sure that they had their confirmation of competency, which is different than training certificate. Wondering if anybody knows if there are NUCMEC specific training offered by any particular companies. I don't know of any right now, but it looks like there might be some call for that. In terms of it affecting 2910 packages, in terms of it, from what I read in the comments of the Gazette, the biggest concern from those from nuclear is that in the past, that if you were teaching doing nuclear training, that you kind of could forget about a lot of parts in the general awareness. And now they're requiring questions on the test about things that you may not have tested before, and coverage in your training about that under the general awareness, because they want that base level of knowledge about TDG in general beforehand. And if we have, Laura, sorry. Yeah.
Your training still can be dedicated to the type of package that you're transporting, right? So if you're only transporting 2910 type packages, you don't have to teach them about LSA1 material or surface contaminated objects, but you do have to make sure that your training is assessed per the competency standard for the work that the person's doing.
Yeah, like you have to have some general, like the general awareness actually says like you have to cover those topics. So how you cover that, you don't have to fine grain everything, I don't think. But again, we can't speak for the regulator, and they will have more guidance materials out.
Yeah,
So,
the
you know,
competency is about the job task that's being done. It's not a competency assessment for things that they don't do. So if you're not transporting a package, you don't have to do a competency on a type A package.
yeah, but you do have to cover in general the fact that there's not
Yes.
class as a dangerous good, that there are means of containment. Like you have to do it at a high level, and then you can fine grain it down. If we have a third party come to package label document or shipments, this is mostly for waste. Is the competency training still required, or is the general training? No, you must have some agreement. It says right in there with subcontractors that either they're doing the training and you sign off. So third party has to prove, you have to ensure that they have the proper training. So will there be an assessment of the newly developed training competency assessment? In other words, who will verify the new training competency I develop will meet the new regulation requirements? I haven't found anything on that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I went from like the core documents, but again, they're still in the process of creating supporting documents. So I expect those will come out over time between now and the fall. This was really, our webinar was put in place because basically I gave a radiation safety officer refresher course and nobody had heard of this, right? And that's concerning because a good portion of those people were involved in TDG. So there's more details. Like I'd said, Transport Canada said they're not just going to put it out there with no support. And in the past, in communication with Transport Canada, they're fairly responsive. So we'll keep an eye on the developments as they go on. And if need be, like we will continue our webinar series in the fall and possibly put on another one at that time when there's more information out. Okay, I think that's all the Q&As in there. Connie,
I'll add a little bit to that too.
Sorry.
In general, when we're responsible for creating training programs, whether it's under the CNSC regulations or under transportation of dangerous goods regulations, there can at least come a point where you're being audited or having an inspection done, and they can ask to see your training records and your training materials. So at that point, the auditor may be doing that evaluation. So we have to make sure when we're putting our training together that we're meeting all the requirements of our regulation and or our license. Because during an audit or an inspection, that's when it could be assessed.
Yes, thanks, Laura. And in terms of, I know that some of the comments that came in the Gazette was a request to have the training organizations some certification process for it. So I don't know if they will take that into consideration. You know, that part is closed. You can still read the comments. But I don't have any feedback. We're not the regulators on how they're going to address that request from people because it's difficult to know, right? Is this somebody that's competent or not? Connie, did you want to ask a question? Connie and Hazel, sorry.
Yeah, we just wanted to know if the Radiation Safety Institute will be offering an updated TDG training course to reflect these changes.
Oh, sorry, it kind of didn't come through really well. Something about updated TDG training, but are you offering it or looking for it? That's what I couldn't hear.
I was just wondering if you guys, the Radiation Safety Institute, would be offering a course reflecting these changes.
Yes, yeah, that's part of why I've been looking at the Gazette. So it's like this is something that we've been working on, is updating our e-learning courses and our components for our RSO and RSO2 courses that we put on. And we do have one that we do as a commission course that we're considering putting on our training calendar. So it is something that I'll be working on this summer when our RSO courses slow down. That's what we do through the summer, is update our materials. So
it may be only a partial assessment though, right? Because people
yes,
have to be assessed against the job that they're doing. And we can't do that for every company as part of an online or targeted course. So there will still be an assessment component that each company will have to do for their employees based on the tasks that employee will do for the employer.
yeah, so we can do the functions, or sorry, we can do the general awareness training, right? And we are capable of doing some level of customized courses and training materials and stuff like that for companies, but there are things like some of the assessment methods are interviews or collection of evidence, or yeah, not everything is paper and pencil anymore. So really take a dig, but we are there to help afterwards. To hear.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah,
Hi.
my question is related to I just did the refresher course with you guys for the RSO.
Yes.
And my question is the TDG training in there, is it aligned with the latest, like, current changes?
No, though that is, but your training certificate will still be good for the time on that training certificate. So the next time you require training, you will need one that's up to date with that. Because the regulations are not yet in place. So the new.
So we'll say that like now I can consider the current training is based on the previous system. So it's not with the changes that like now.
So our current training is based on the current regulations because these ones are not yet in force. So we have to follow once they're put out there, then we will follow the new regulations.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, with that, Laura, is there any last comments you'd like to make?
There was one question in the chat, which I think we answered, but I'm going to specifically say Jill had asked, do we know for certain if the new TDG regs will come to effect into the fall? Nothing's ever guaranteed with government, right? So that's their plan. Their plan is to put it into place in the fall, as they've told us. But something could happen and it could get a bit delayed. I know for the RP regulations, it was planned on being done in 1 year, and I think it ended up being like a year and a half later that they finally get it done. So we're sort of waiting to see, and that's the plan, but it may not actually happen that way.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part. It's also why they give you a year to do it, but I think in some applications, a year would be, it might take you a year to get up and running. So, but it's just something to have in the back of your mind. So, you don't necessarily want to jump, if there was an election came into place, all this could change, right? Like this is the intent. This is to bring information to people, just to bring awareness that this is coming down, because it is quite a major change. Like I hope this doesn't count as reproducing in any form. Like it's a fairly thick document, right? So, and the tables in the back, right? It's important that you go through and understand what's coming down, especially if you're in a larger organization with layers of people to go through if you have to make major changes to things like this. So that's why we want to bring it today. So Laura, thanks so much. I don't know if there's any last comments over and above that. Otherwise,
no last words.
All right. And then, so what we're going to do now, thanks everyone for coming. I am going to go back to sharing the screen so we can have our contact information up. So if you do, we hope that this was informative for everyone. And just know that if you have any questions about any radiation safety topic, please feel free to contact us at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. We have a toll-free information service to support questions from employers, workers, and the public with respect to both ionizing and non-ionizing radiation safety. We also provide consulting services for those who might need support in developing a radiation protection program and related services, including radiation surveys. If you have any further questions about ionizing or non-ionizing radiation, please feel free to contact us toll-free at 1-800-263-5803 or by email at info@radiationsafety.ca. You can also visit us on the web at www.radiation.safety.ca or find us on Facebook. Once again, I would like to thank our guest, Laura Boksman, for sharing her expertise. And thank you to everyone who took the time to join us today. We will now move to our 20-minute wellness break in the form of beginner Tai Chi led by Charlmane Wong of Gong Tai-Chi and Qigong in Richmond Hill, Ontario. If you can stay with us, it would be appreciated. We do know that some people's lunch breaks are coming to an end, but remember that health and safety is, it's about our whole body wellness. So that's why we do this as well. So we realize some may have to go, but appreciate anyone participating as they can.
All right. Okay, hi everyone. I'm back here to do another practice session of beginners Tai Chi. So what I'm planning to do today is to focus on practicing what we have learned in the past and basically do a wrap up of all the things that we have been doing. So let's get started.
first of all, get off your chairs, and we're gonna do a couple of warm-up exercises before we actually start the actual Tai Chi moves. So place your feet shoulder width apart, toes pointing forward. Now the first move, very easy. You basically just interlace your fingers, bring them up the middle. At about chest height, you turn the palms upward and try to stretch upward with straight arms. And then you open the hands, bring them back down the sides, and have a gentle semi-squat as you come down, and then we're going to repeat again. After sitting all day, every now and then, maybe you should just get up and stretch up. This time we're going to breathe in as you stretch up. And then release the fingers, relax the arms, and coming down as you breathe out. Let's do that a couple of more times. Breathe in slowly and deeply. Breathe out also slowly. Again, up. Now this time as we go up, we breathe in. We also want to look up to the ceiling a little bit. And then we can look back down to the front as we release the hands and come down. Let's do that a couple more times like this. Breathe in, look up, look back to the front, release your hands and breathe out. One last time. Breathe in, stretch upward, look up, look back to the front, release, relax, come down. Okay, relax. Now we're going to go to do the second warm-up move, right? This time we're going to open the arms sideways, making a really big V shape, not completely horizontal. And then when you bring them up, palms facing each other, and you go down, squat, bringing the elbows down, and the hands all the way down as you stand back up. Let's do that again. Stretch the arms without locking the elbows. Turn the palms towards each other, fingers pointing up as you use the core to draw the arms down. Let's do that again. Now for those complete beginners joining for the first time, Tai Chi is always done in a slow, relaxed manner. We want the movements to be slow but continuous, so you don't take any pauses in between the repetitions. So you want to time them so that they go slowly. You'll feel more relaxed that way. Make sure you keep breathing. Just one last time. Okay. All right, now we're going to get to the real Tai Chi moves. So far we have basically learned 3 or 4 different Tai Chi movements. The first one is called cloud hands. If you remember, we're going to walk sideways. All right. So let's get started with one side. For example, I'm going to go this way. Now, for your convenience, it may be easier if we just do mirror image. All right. So if we are going this way, we're going to have this hand up, which would be your right hand if you're going to the right side. And the other hand, you just place it there. All right. You sit down a little bit. Okay, so we're going to step towards the right, your right side, move the weight entirely to the right foot, and then you switch the hands so that your left hand goes up, you bring the left foot back, And then you move the weight to your left side. And then we do that again. Switch, step, shift weight, switch, step, and shift weight. So every time we step, we try to maintain the body at the same height so you don't stand up in between. So we're gonna have a little bit of a squat throughout. This is gonna be an exercise that can strengthen your legs that way. Again, keep the shoulders relaxed. Keep the arms rounded. One more step. Okay, now we're going to go back that way. So without standing up, with your left hand on top, we're going to step the left foot. We're going to switch the hands and step the right foot. And then we repeat. Two more steps, switch hands and step your left foot. You try to keep the toes pointing forward and in a semi-squat posture. One last time, switch the hands and step to your left. And then we come back. All right, okay. Now we're gonna practice the other movements. Basically, it's called, there are two sets of movements that we're gonna combine together, but let's first start with practicing the footwork related to these movements. We need to have a bowl stance, if you remember. Now we have to be walking forward, all right? So I'm gonna turn to one side and I'm gonna walk towards this direction. Now this time you can follow along the same side. So for footwork practice, we can start with first putting our hands on our hips. Let's start with turning the right toes to about 45 degrees. And then we move the weight entirely to the right side. And then we step out the left heel. And then we move the weight back to the left foot. With a bowl step, the front toes are pointing forward. The back toes are pointing 45 degrees. Now we're gonna take the second step. We sit back to free up the left toes, and we turn the left toes 45 degrees. Move the weight entirely to the left side, and put the right heel forward. Now you realize that if you do this slowly, it's actually more difficult. You want to maintain the balance throughout. Again, turn to the right side. Move your weight so that you're very stable. Then you slowly put down the left heel, and then you move to the front. One more time. Sit back. Turn the left toes. Move the weight. Put the right heel forward. And move the weight. When you're in a bowl step, the front toes absorb about 60 to 70% of the weight, and the back foot the remainder of the weight. All right, now let's turn around and do that again. All right, now this time we're going to start with turning the left toes. It doesn't matter which side you start with, right? After you turn the left toes, the body and the hips facing that direction as well, and you put the right heel forward. And when you move the weight back to the front foot, the body is now squaring to the front. Sit back, turn the right toes together with that side of the hip and shoulders. Put down the left heel and transfer your weight. Again, sit back, turn the left side. Try to move the weight slowly with control. Then you put down the right heel and then move the weight. One more time, sit back, turn to the right side. Slowly put down the left heel and go back. All right, now this time we're going to practice just one move called parting wild horse's mane. As you remember, this move requires the bow step that we were just practicing, but we're going to add our arms. All right, so now I'm going to go back this way. So we can start off with turning to the right side. So right toes, right hip, right shoulders. Now our weight is now on the right foot. You're going to do a right hold ball, which means that the right arm is on top of the left arm with the palms facing each other as if you're holding a ball. Then with that, you're going to step forward, the left heel. And when you're moving the weight forward, you open the arms diagonally so that your left arm goes pointing to the left upside and the right hand on the other corner. Then you sit back, turn the left toes. Once you move the weight to your left foot, you do a left hold ball. This time your left hand over your right hand. You step your right heel forward. And as you go forward, you open the arms diagonally again. Now checking the palms, the right palm should be facing up, left palm facing down. You don't need to turn the palms at all. Again, turn the right foot. Move the weight to the right, right hold ball. Now the right palm facing down, left palm facing up. And move. Repeat. Sit back, turn. As your weight moves to the left, left hold ball. Move the right foot, heel down. Open the arms diagonal. One more step if you have the space. Turn right side. Right hold ball. Step forward. And move. Okay, let's do that one more time. Turning around. This time we can start with turning the left toes, making sure that the hip, the shoulders all turn. You sit down, hinging on your left hip joint. Then you have a left hold ball. And then we step the right heel. Try to make sure that the 2 feet are not stepping on the same line. Now as you move forward, once you're in a bow step, there should be some space between the 2 feet, about shoulder width apart. Let's try that again. Sit back, turn to the right side, right hold ball. Step with the left heel. You may think that you're stepping a little bit to the left corner. And then as you move, it's easier to have the 2 feet shoulder width apart. Again, sit back, turn to the left, left hold ball as you move the weight to the left foot. Step forward the right heel. Move weight towards the front foot and open your arms. Again, sit back, turn, move the weight to the right, right hold ball. Step forward the left foot and open the arms and move the weight. One last time, sit back, turn to the left, left hold ball, step, and open. Okay, all right. Now, just a quick review of the new move that we learned last time. Very simple one. I'm going to face the camera to do that, and you can do that along with me. We're going to connect this new move to the parting wild horse's mane that we were just doing. So what I'm going to do is to do one parting wild horse's mane move and then add the new move. All right, so follow along. Now again, we can start with turning. This time I'll mirror your mirror image again. You can start with turning your left toes. Once you move your weight to this side, you have a left hold ball. All right, and then you step forward with the other foot. Open diagonally for the for 1 repetition of parting wild horse's mane. Then you step forward with the back foot about halfway, because sometimes we call it a half step. Move your weight back onto that foot, and then change the hand's position so that the fingers are more or less pointing forward. And you also change the front foot so that the heel is on the ground, but the weight is primarily on the back foot. All right. We're going to do the other one exactly in the mirror image. So now we're going to turn this time your right toes. Move the weight to your right side with the right whole ball. First, parting wild horse's mane. Step forward, open the arms. And then you do the same thing. The back foot, half step forward. Sit back on that side. And then place the hands, palms facing more or less each other, and the fingers pointing up. Your left heel on the floor. All right, let's do that one last time on each side, and we're going to connect. All right, so turn to your left side, left whole ball, and then step forward, parting wild horse's mane. And then we step forward with the back foot, sit back, and place the hands. Try to extend the arms forward. All right, one last time. Turn to your right, right whole ball, right hand on top, your right hand on top, parting wild horse's mane. Half step. And then place the hands in front with the front heel on the ground. All right, now let's just practice together with the parting wild horse's mane. Let's start with turning to the right side, right whole ball. We're going to do 3 times parting wild horse's mane. 1, sit back and turn. This time, left whole ball. I'm going to do it on the same side. Second, parting wild horse's mane. And third time, turn. The parting wild horse's mane is exactly the same as what we did before. So after the third time, now the back foot halfway step to the front, still about 45 degrees. Sit back onto that back foot. Turn the palms so that the fingers are pointing up, and the front heel now on the floor. All right, now let's turn the other way. Doing basically the same thing. This time we're going to turn the left foot first. Move the weight to the left. Left whole ball. Step. First, parting wild horse's mane. Sit back. Turn the front toes. Right whole ball. Step. Second, parting wild horse's mane. And one more. Sit back and turn. Left whole ball. Move the weight to the left. Step the right heel forward. Shift weight. And third, parting wild horse's mane. Now again, the back foot. Step forward about halfway. Sit back onto that back foot. Turn the hands so that the palms are more or less facing each other. Fingers up, and then place the right heel on the floor. All right. I think that's the time we have. All right, so let's do a cool down, quick cool down movement, and then we're gonna finish the session. All right, now just standing with the feet slightly shoulder width apart. Bring the hands up. Take a slow, deep breath in. Turn the palms so that they are facing down, and breathe out. Let's do 2 more times to calm down your breath and your heart rate. Breathe in. Breathe out. And one last time. Breathe in. Breathe out. All right. So that's it for today. Again, I enjoyed all the sessions that we did together. Hope to see you again one day.
Thank you,
All
Charmaine.
right.
And
Thank
as I mentioned at the start, we usually do our webinar series in seasons. So we will be stopping now for the summer and starting back up in the fall. Charmaine, we greatly appreciate all the movements and your incorporation of Tai Chi that you were able to do with our webinar series this year. So thanks again. And we've learned a lot from you over these 6 sessions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Have a nice day, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for staying and coming. Bye, Charmaine.
Bye.